Hello and welcome to another All the Mod 6 tutorial. Today we're going to be talking about Bigger Reactors. Bigger Reactors is a mod for power generation, and it's exactly what it sounds like. It's bigger reactors. I have an assembly put together over here, and you can see that it is, I don't know, probably not the most complex thing you're ever going to build in All the Mod 6, but we're going to go over how this is all put together, and we're going to talk about things that you should be concerned with when building a bigger reactor, along with your turbine setup to harvest the power from it. So let's start with the concerns first. Here we have our reactor terminal, and this is attached to our reactor. Our reactor is drawing water from these aqueous accumulators. They need to be surrounded by water source blocks. I have ultimate mechanical pipe feeding water into reactor coolant ports. Then we have a chest here full of uranium ingots that is feeding into a reactor access port using item pipe from the pipes mod. And then we have a reactor access port set up to output waste, and that is feeding cyanide ingots into this diamond chest. This is the reactor terminal UI, and here we can see our case heat, so that's the temperature of these blocks, and we can see our fuel heat, and that's the temperature of the fuel that is inside of the fuel rods. Just real quick, I'm going to show you right over here. A basic setup is going to be something like this. You're going to do your fuel rods, and you can do these in any kind of configuration you want, really. I like to space mine out a little bit. This is what's going on inside of the emerald blocks there. That's what you can't see inside of the emerald blocks in the completed reactor over there. Now, the reactor does not directly generate power. What the reactor does is it generates steam. We feed it water, like I said, from the aqueous accumulators over there, and it turns it into steam by heating it, by allowing uranium to react. It also uses the water to cool itself, and temperature is very important because if this thing goes critical, you're going to have a very big problem on your hands. The next thing is going to be your turbines. The turbines need some manner of metal wrapped around one end, the end not closest to the reactor preferably, and that metal is going to be what generates your electricity. It's going to act like a coil does in a real world generator. And you can see right here, it's going to tell us that rotors perform best at 900 or 1800 RPMs. This one is spinning a little slower than the other one. I couldn't really give you a reason for that, but this is going to be a standard turbine build. On the end closest to the reactor, you are going to need turbine coolant ports. And actually one of those is going to need to be set to output water back into the reactor. And then you're going to need your turbine rotor shaft. You're going to run that all the way from a turbine rotor bearing on one end to a turbine rotor bearing on the other end. And then you're going to cover it with the turbine rotor blades. The way I recommend doing this is actually to build out your turbine first and then build your enclosure around it, because as I was building the demonstration setup over here, I made some mistakes and I built the enclosure before I built my turbine setup, and now my turbine only has one set of rotor blades going all the way around it, whereas over here you can see I have room for two. I don't know what the maximum efficiency is, if it's 1, 2, 3, or 4. I don't know how far you can take these out. I haven't experimented all that much with this mod, but I can tell you I'm pretty sure that one turbine rotor blade across the entire length of your shaft is probably not going to be the most efficient. As you can see here, with all of this going on, we are only outputting 5.1 mega RFs, which is pretty good, honestly. That's not a bad amount of power output, but I think you can do a lot better with a more effective rotor setup. So then back to the reactor, you're going to need your access ports. You're going to need coolant ports. These will be what you put your water into from your aqueous accumulators, and these will be what your fuel goes into and your waste comes out of. And you can use a wrench to right click on this one to switch it to output mode, or it actually does have a UI once the multi-block is completed. And you can tell when the multi-block is completed because you can see the difference between this texture here and this texture over here. Those are the same blocks. Those are all just reactor casings. But when the multi-block is finished, then you have a different texture on them. You will also need a reactor terminal, and I like to do reactor glass, but I'm pretty confident that you can actually just wrap the whole thing in reactor casing. So if that's cheaper for you in your world somehow, give it a shot. I don't know for certain that it will work, but I believe it will. And then your coolant ports. You want these to be set up so that they are centered on your turbine shaft. So you are going to want to place them fairly high up to make that an easier task to accomplish. And then in the middle of those, that's where you're going to place the rotor blade. But keep in mind, you're going to need turbine coolant ports on the opposite side of your reactor coolant ports. It is kind of hard to see. But yeah, from right here, you can see I do have a reactor coolant port matched up to a turbine coolant port. And you can't just have the reactor coolant ports and no turbine coolant ports. Important to keep that in mind, otherwise nothing's going to flow between them. They are completely separate structures, but they do have a lot of the same parts, and it can get confusing, I suppose. So just keep that in mind. You're going to need your turbine coolant ports and your reactor coolant ports. The reactor coolant ports obviously go on the reactor, and the turbine coolant ports go on the turbine. I think that's honestly about it, and you can use whatever outputs you want, whatever wiring you want to take output power. It's going to need to be able to handle a significant amount of RF, so you're going to want some pretty robust power handling cables there. You're going to get your power out through a turbine power tap. I don't know if there are any minimum or maximum dimensions, honestly, like I was saying earlier, but feel free to let me know in the comments down below if you find a minimum or maximum dimension. Well, I think obviously on the turbine, you're going to need at least one rotor blade. But I don't know how far down the shaft you have to go with that to get the thing to actually spin. And for your coil, you're going to need at least 8 blocks to do one full wrap around. And then one last thing here. So on the turbine terminal, you have a UI here that shows you your flow rate of steam, shows you how much steam you're allowing to pump into the turbine at any given moment in time. It shows you how much water is in the turbine. And it's important to watch this because if you get water building up in the turbine, it means that something is wrong. Something is definitely wrong because you aren't flowing water back into the reactor quickly enough. And then you have online, offline. You can turn this on or off, and you can decide whether or not the coil is engaged. If you disengage the coil while it's on, you will see your RPM spike up rapidly, and that can get dangerous. And you can see that thing spinning real freaking quick there. Those are the basics of bigger reactors. That does it for today's tutorial. I hope you learned something useful. Feel free to ask any questions you have in the comments down below. And if you did learn something useful, please feel free to leave a like. I would really appreciate that from you. Let me know that I'm doing good for you, and let the YouTube algorithm know that people are liking my videos and my tutorials are useful. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a great rest of the day. Take care, and bye-bye.